So Ryan, I've got a really interesting question for you, mate.
Good. Let's hear it.
Why do you exist?
It's going to be one of those podcasts. Huh? All right.
What is the purpose of your job?
Of my job? I thought you meant of my life.
Well, I already know the answer to that one, mate. And you don't want to hear what I would say, but
I don't know that justifying my job is going to be that much easier than justifying my existence.
No, so we've had a pickle in, okay, from Clive
tell me
Hearst.
the pickle is, why does Ryan exist?
Well, no, you're an expert on this, so
okay.
I thought it would be good in asking you. So Clive Hearst wrote into us with a pickle. And by the way, for anybody that doesn't know, a pickle is a business problem that they have. This is more careers advice, I guess, than a business problem, but happy to deal with it. And basically, his question is, should I invest in an MBA? And given the fact that this is what you teach, I thought you would be a good person to ask.
I mean, maybe a good person, maybe not. So when you told me we were going to be talking about this, I looked up one of my favorite quotes. This is from the author Upton Sinclair. And it says, it is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it. And so while I've got some insider perspective as an MBA professor, so I'm a marketing professor at a business school, and I teach almost exclusively MBAs, and I can provide perspective from that. I do want to be very upfront with my bias. I have a strong interest in MBA programs continuing and doing well.
Yes.
So I'll be as honest as I can be, but also, my first bit of advice for Clive is to don't just listen to MBA professors if you are wondering whether an MBA is for you. There's a lot of good information out there and a lot of differences of opinion. And so I would encourage anybody who's considering this as a step to get multiple perspectives on this. I'll provide my own as well as I can, but don't trust me by yourself.
And I would extend this a bit further, because as I thought about this, I was then thinking, if a member of your team, so you may not be, dear listener, thinking to themselves, should I get an MBA? But it did make me think. So if a member of my team came to me as the leader and said, I'm thinking of doing an MBA, should I do that? What would I say? Or somebody that what would you do or say, basically? So I don't think this is just for people that are looking to be MBAs. I think you could take the wider context as well of just further education, basically.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to start off talking about MBAs, but I think that you and I agreed a lot of what we're going to say would apply to somebody deciding whether to go to law school or whether to even go to get an undergraduate degree. So we'll focus on MBA, but yeah, a lot of these questions will apply. And that's where I want to start, is by encouraging someone who's thinking about an MBA or any graduate program to ask themselves some questions about what they want. So what are your long-term goals?
Why are you doing it?
And there are several. Some people use an MBA as a chance to pivot in their career. So if they've been working in one area and then they really want to go start working in another area. So, if you were an engineer and you really want to work in finance, or, if you were in HR and you want to start working in marketing, that can be a hard jump to make on its own. And so some people use an MBA to do that.
Yeah.
Some people are looking for, a track to get into management roles. And a lot of those still require some kind of graduate degree, usually an MBA. Some people are in it for the education. I will suggest that's a relatively small percentage who just really want to know about, business and how business operates and how they can work. But we do, I get some joint degree program students. So we have people who are getting an MBA and a master's in public health, or an MBA and a medical doctorate degree. And so for those people, I think that they do kind of want a theoretical knowledge of how business works so that they'll be better able to do their primary job as a public health official or as a doctor, for example.
So maybe I could start by asking you just a few basic questions.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, how long does it? How long does an MBA last? What
Yeah.
type of things would you cover? Why have an MBA if you've then got sort of more specialized programs as well?
Very good questions. So the traditional MBA program lasts 2 years. So
Right,
you generally start in the fall, and then over the summer you do an internship with a company, and then you come back and you do another round of classes, and you're done in April or May. So that's traditional. But there have been all kinds of variants of that have grown up. So most schools will now do a 1 year flavor of that, a 1 year MBA program. And so for that, you start in, usually April, and you do your first year of classes over the summer. So it's kind of like a compressed, intense summer of classes. And then you do your second year as a typical MBA student. So the advantage of that is that it's just a year that you're not working instead of the two
right,
years. Disadvantage of that is it generally does not come with that internship, which can be important, especially for people who are looking to transition across careers. But it's also kind of a leg up, kind of
right.
starting in with a company before you actually sign with them. And then there are other formats too. So I teach an evening format, which I think lasts between 3 to 5 years and is just taught in the evening. So you get to keep your day job. There's executive or modular formats where it'll be mostly on kind of weekends and then a few evenings. So there are lots of different flavors of it. But generally speaking, it's like a master's degree where it's 2 years.
Right.
In terms of what's covered, it is a management degree, which means it's supposed to be a general purpose degree to allow people to serve in management roles within a firm. So although you tend to specialize, so you might take more marketing classes or more finance classes, one of the hallmarks of an MBA is that it is general. So everybody goes into an MBA has to take a little bit of marketing, a little bit of operations, a little bit of accounting, a little bit of finance. And the idea is that as you're kind of more senior in the organization, you should have that global perspective and training so that you
Sure.
can understand where people are coming from and what they do. So I teach the introductory marketing class, which means given the kind of the percentages of student interest at Emory, I'm mostly teaching finance and consulting students, which for me is fun. I kind of enjoy getting mildly hostile finance students thinking marketing is a waste of time on the first day. And then by the end of the semester, I've convinced most of them that it can help them do their jobs better, even if they're not working in marketing.
Maybe you're doing some good for humanity in converting some finance people to marketing thinking.
Maybe, or even if I can just like kind of round off the edges a little bit,
Yeah.
that might be enough. So, and then you had a third question also, which was
I think you dealt with it, which
okay.
is so yeah. And so, I mean, let me ask you another question because I wrote a load of questions down before we started this. Obviously, why bother with it?
Yeah,
Why because if I go back to my personal background, the good thing that I managed to do was because I was working at British Telecom, so a bloody large organisation. I managed to move around the organisation. So I started off in sales, then I went to marketing, then I went to customer training, then I went to customer service, and I learned different disciplines as I went. Yeah.
yeah.
Now, clearly, I know that not everybody works for large organisations, but why bother? What would you say are the key advantages?
Sure. So one is that for a long time, and we may be reaching a turning point on this, although it's tough to see. But for a long time, a lot of organizations required it. So just like a lot of organizations require a bachelor's degree in order to, start in various positions, a lot of firms will require an MBA or some kind of graduate degree in order to attain certain positions within the organization.
Right.
We could have a debate about whether that is wise, whether that is kind
And what
of.
do you think? I mean,
I'm
because
I'm
that
not a
is an
big fan of
interest.
hard rules around that. Personally, I think that there's been a lot of degree inflation where people are kind of getting degrees as a way of signaling that they're worthy of being considered when the degree has nothing to do with the job.
Sure.
And so we're kind of creating some arbitrary barriers for people participating in the
Yeah,
economy.
I read a post on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago, and it talked about a paper ceiling,
Yeah.
which I'd never really heard of before. In other words, are you rejecting, particularly in the labour market that we've got, are you rejecting a load of people, or people aren't applying for things because they don't have the qualifications? And whilst
When importantly, the qualifications may not be necessary to do the job.
right,
Like I've got no problem with qualifications on a job, but I heard that something like more than 50% of the letter carriers in the U.S. have college degrees.
right,
Some huge percentage of bartenders have college degrees. And again, I'm not opposed to college
you're
degrees.
not
I think
opposed to
that
bartenders,
yeah. I mean, I don't, and I don't know that most bars are like screening on that, saying don't apply for a bartender job if you don't have an
sure,
undergraduate degree. But there's a lot of that happens in other businesses where it's like, yeah, don't
sure,
even apply for this job unless you have an undergraduate degree.
sure,
And for some jobs, that's absolutely appropriate. But I think for many companies, that's just become kind of the default. We're going to ask for that regardless. And I think also for some graduate level positions, like I think that there's some that say we need an MBA or equivalent, and sometimes that may be absolutely appropriate, but for sometimes it's not. So to your question of
sure,
why do people do this or why is it worth it? That's one of the reasons why historically
right,
is that some people would see it as they needed to. In other
right,
cases, it's not strictly necessary, but it is kind of a fast track.
right,
So you could get there without an MBA, but if you get the MBA, it's just going to be faster and easier and smoother. There's already a path there as opposed to having to
right,
blaze your own trail with that.
right. And is there evidence then of this working in the sense of that? I did look up some stats earlier,
Yeah.
um, but
So
is
is
there
it
evidence
financially
of it?
worthwhile to get your
Yeah,
MBA?
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, some of the things that I'm sure you'll learn are more life things, but do people with MBAs get high salaries?
So the answer is yes, but
Right,
so in general, on average, as far as I know, based on the last statistics I've seen, MBA's degrees tend to pay off. So you tend to more than recoup your investment and end up making more money over your lifetime with the MBA. And so it is a good financial investment. But just like with undergraduate degrees, that's also true of undergraduate degrees, but there's huge variation in there. So I was talking with a professor at the school where I got my graduate degree, where I got my PhD, and he said, so it's the Kellogg School at Northwestern. He said that when he started as a professor, that had been like 40 years earlier, some huge proportion of their MBA students went to go and work in advertising.
right,
And at the time that I was there, and now it's essentially zero. Zero MBAs go to work in advertising. And the reason is that salaries have not kept up. So
right,
it doesn't make financial sense to get a very expensive MBA and then to go and work in advertising because so many people want to work in advertising because it's fun and sexy that depresses the wages. So they can pay
hmm,
dirt and people will still do it. And so they do. And so it doesn't make financial sense to get an MBA to go and do that.
sure,
And so you need to go into this with that in mind. There are certain jobs within organizations where an MBA is not going to pay off, even if on average it does, because those jobs don't pay enough to justify an expensive degree, and they can be expensive.
right,
So that I would be very clear. It's also true that like certain programs don't. So if you get an MBA from kind of a lower ranked program or one that doesn't have a lot of prestige, then that may not pay off as quickly. If you go to Harvard or Columbia or Kellogg, you might have to go into $100,000 of debt to get that degree. They're very
uh,
expensive, but they also tend to pay off relatively quickly based on the jobs people get. Other programs you could pay relatively little to get the MBA, but the programs are not kind of as respected, or the connections aren't as strong. And
But
so
I presume they must be equivalent.
equivalents to MBA degrees.
Well, the standard of them. So somebody coming out from Harvard, there's a certain I presume there must be some type of body that makes sure that all MBAs are equal.
No, they're all accredited, which means that there's a minimum threshold, but it's
Right,
not the case. Now, this is a big debate in higher education. Um, there's there's the argument that what universities do, and I'll include graduate programs in that too, is like take clay and then mold it into something amazing. So we could take anybody and drop them into Harvard, and then over the course of 4 years, or drop them into Harvard Business School, and over the course of 2 years, we'd create something amazing out of that.
right,
There's also the more cynical argument, which is that essentially these universities act as kind of screeners. So you're
right,
not getting into Harvard unless you're amazing. And so the fact that you graduated from Harvard doesn't necessarily mean you learned anything, but the fact that you got in means that you're a safe bet. And
right.
so I
Yeah, I
tend
mean,
to fall
I
somewhere in
can.
the middle. I think that there is this screener thing that's going on, and I think that's real.
Sure,
I also like, for selfish reasons, to think that we're doing something with
sure.
these students in the time that we have them. But yeah, I don't discount the other argument.
I can absolutely see if you've got a degree of whatever you it may be. If you've gone to Oxford or Cambridge,
Yeah,
then that's going to be classed as a better degree than if you went to wherever it may be.
yeah,
In fact, I'm just about to argue against myself to a certain extent, because I was remembering when our kids did that, Oxford and Cambridge weren't necessarily the best the best universities for the degree that they wanted.
yes,
So if you looked at the tables, then if my son took psychology and
yep,
my daughter took zoology, it wasn't. Yeah. Anyway, you get the idea.
yeah. No,
Um,
even though MBAs are general purpose degrees, there are differences in programs. So Kellogg, for example, is known historically for marketing strength, and there are other
right.
programs that are known for finance and for
Right.
consulting and other things. So yeah,
Right.
there are some variations in and around that.
Right. Right. Okay. All right. That makes sense. And is there any truth in the rumor about people tend to do more MBAs when there's a recession?
Yeah, that's not a rumor at all. That is cold hard fact. So we're
Right.
we're a little bit vampiric in business schools, and that we're always kind of hoping for a recession, because that's good. That's not true. We're not hoping for a recession. But yeah, though, when the you can think about it from an opportunity cost perspective. So if you've got a great job and you've got lots of opportunities to move around within your job, taking 2 years off is a huge sacrifice. Like
Yeah.
that's 2 years you're not earning an income. That's 2 years you're not getting kind of work experience. 2 years you're not moving within your organization. And so when the economy is really hot, people are less excited about dropping out of that to go to school for a while. On the other hand, when the economy has cooled down, when it's harder to find jobs, when you really are looking to differentiate yourself, then yes, that is when people are more willing to go back to school for a while, and sometimes wait out the recession, or look to distinguish themselves a little bit more from their peers. So yeah,
Right.
that's not a rumor at all. That's
Right.
true.
And I'm asking all these questions because I'm genuinely interested, actually, and
Yeah.
I've not got an MBA myself, but I'm not going to get one either because I'm just
Never say
too
never,
old.
Colin. Okay.
Never say never. Correct. But what does the average person look like? Is there an average? Is it age profile? Is it background? Is it what is it?
So that'll also depend on the program. The best MBA programs tend to require several years of work experience.
Okay.
They want you to actually have been out in the workforce, to have that experience, to ideally have managed some people. And then when you come in, you'll be able to build on that expertise. So there are programs where you can go in with zero work experience, just kind of go straight from undergrad. But those tend to be like less prestigious, less well accepted, that kind of thing. So that you're still getting some training in that. But yeah, usually the students I teach, have been out 3 to 5 years, so they're in their mid to late 20s. When I started teaching, I was a little bit older than that, but I'd worked for a while and then I got my PhD. But I was only 5 or 6 years older than my MBA students at the time, and so I think they kind of felt like I was a mascot for them. And those days are long gone. I remembered that transition when it was clearly no longer us, and now it was like a you versus us. Like I had aged out of that cohort. But I also teach occasionally executive MBAs who tend to go back in their 40s and 50s to kind of sharpen up some of those skills. So I've taught people in all those age ranges.
And I
In
guess
terms of what they do, there's a variety of backgrounds. The joke is that MBAs attract both poets and quants, and so both of these are together. So you've got, like, on the poet side, you've got like the people who are more interested in kind of management and HR and marketing, and then you've got the quants who are interested in finance and operations. And part of what I like about teaching MBAs is that all of these people have to kind of get along, and we get to
Sure.
form teams of people of varied backgrounds and interests, and
Sure.
let them work together. And that part's fun.
And I would imagine that's a big part of it as well, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
I would imagine the networking that you get
Absolutely.
with people, and probably making friends for life. And if you're in business, then all of that come into play, basically.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a big part of it. And then your alumni network and all of that. Very, very important part of it.
So let me ask you another question. Something that's has fascinated me for years.
Yeah.
I always remember when I first started work, and there was a guy there that was, I think he had a master's or whatever. Anyway, long and short of it is, he didn't have a bloody ounce of common sense. So,
Wait till I introduce you to some PhDs.
so highly intelligent,
Yeah.
right? Highly intelligent, but I wouldn't have had him on my team.
Yeah.
Because he just couldn't implement anything. And, what seemed to me as being blindingly obvious, he was oblivious to. I presume you've come across that.
Yeah. MBAs tend to be a little bit harder nosed than the average graduate student.
Right.
So one of the things that I like about teaching MBAs, even as opposed to undergraduates, is that they push back.
Right.
So MBAs, on average, like they will want to know, like, okay, well, what do we do with this? Like, how do we use this?
Sure.
It can make teaching a class like customer behavior, where we delve into the psychology, it can make that challenging. When I teach that to undergrads, they just accept it, and there's a lot of like kind of nodding and note taking. And then when you teach that same stuff to MBAs, they're like, well, this is just theory. Like, how can I apply this in my job?
Sure.
So,
and I guess
there
that's
will
the difference
absolutely be.
between.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I guess that's the difference between them having been in the work environment.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, they realize that they're going to have to answer to a boss at some point, and so theory is great, but like, what can I actually do with this? Do we still run into people with no kind of street smarts? Absolutely, yeah, like
Sure.
for sure. But I think there are fewer of them than there are people who might get like a master's degree in engineering, for example, and then go and work in something.
Sure.
Not to say anything negative about our engineers.
Last question from me. Where do you think the future lays with all of this? I mean, is there, given the changes in the workforce, given the, the hybrid working and everything else that's happening, I'm just interested in where you think it all, if we were in 10 years' time, what would we be talking about?
Yeah. There's no question that demand for the MBA degree has been softening. So it's not as strong as it was. We're getting fewer applications than we had before. there's question as to how much of that is driven by a strong economy and how
Yeah.
much of it is kind of a permanent decline. So we'll find out during the next recession whether it bounces back or whether we're on
Sure.
kind of a decline. I do have a sense that kind of this generalist approach, like we want people who kind of know a little bit about a lot of things. I'm getting the feeling that maybe that is being less valued over time, that
Mm.
instead what firms might be looking for is more specialized education. So you see there's been a rather sharp increase in the number of specialized master's programs.
Right.
And so we're developing some of those right now at Emory. But whereas before you might get an MBA and then specialize in analytics, or an MBA and specialize in finance, or an MBA and specialize in marketing, you could still do that, and a lot of people do. But now there are also a lot of programs where you can just get like a master's in marketing, or a
Sure.
master's in finance, or a master's
Sure.
in analytics. And that means you're having to take fewer classes kind of at the more general level, which
Sure.
I think has some drawbacks.
Sure.
But it does mean that you get that depth,
Sure.
which some firms really seem to value.
Sure.
So that's where I assume that in 10 years we'll be further along that path. I assume that the MBA programs will still be there, but will tend to be a little bit smaller, and that proportionally we'll see more of these specialized master's programs. I don't see this degree inflation going away anytime soon. I think that
No.
at one point, having an undergraduate degree was really a mark of someone having,
Yeah.
being very studious, and really having sacrificed a lot to do that. And then at some point, it became kind of standard, right? We can
Yeah.
go back even further. At one point, somebody finishing high school was a
Sure.
optional, and it was a big
Sure.
deal. Now everybody has to finish high school, and then getting an
Sure.
undergraduate degree was kind of a demarcation.
Sure.
We're kind of past that now, where for a lot of people, this is kind of baseline. People
Sure.
consider it part of their basic education. And then what we see now is a lot more people pursuing master's degrees, I think in part to set
Sure.
themselves
Yeah. No. I mean,
apart.
I know my daughter, my youngest daughter. I mean, that's what she did. In the end of the day, was to take a master's simply
Yeah.
because it was going to differentiate her in the field. That was in
Yeah.
zoology.
So the risk is that at some point that becomes almost baseline, and now people need to
Yeah.
get two master's degrees or need to get a
It does
PhD.
make me think about, though, your comments about specialism. That worries me a little
Yeah.
because when I started off with my career, one of the things that I I I worked out was the danger is if you specialize in one area, that limits you into that one area, whether
Yeah.
it's finance, marketing, sales, customer service, whatever it may be. Um, but as you go up in the organization, then by definition the CEO needs to have general skills.
Yeah.
Yeah, they may need to have specialized in one area, but you by definition you need to understand all of those areas because you're the boss and you need to understand all those areas. So I always remember when I was back at BT talking about one of the senior positions was what they called them general managers, which goes, yeah, you need a general experience to become
Yep.
a general manager. um, and that was one of the things that sort of set me off on my course to gain more skills. It would worry me if someone, unless they really thought that there was a future, that they just specialised in one area. And it's not at the beginning, to be honest with you, mate. It's when you get to 40, 50 years old and
Yep.
you've been doing it 20 years, and that's then becomes the challenge because it feels like you're caught between the devil and the deep blue sea.
Yeah.
You've been good in this area. You've had enough of that area. You now want to move to another area, and your experience and everything else doesn't enable you to do that. I don't think I could do what I do now if I hadn't had that more generalist experience in each of those areas. So
No,
that's my two
I
pennies
think
worth.
it's a really good point. Like I think that there's a trade off being made here. I understand the appeal of specialized
Yeah.
education and of really kind of zeroing in. And I understand why firms like to hire that. But I agree. Like, I think it makes me very nervous for someone who has a long-term career plan within business organizations to, not have received formal training in how to read a balance sheet, or,
Sure.
have gotten some basic accounting training. And
Sure.
on the flip side, like, it makes me very nervous for people who go into finance and consulting who don't understand the basics of marketing, who don't understand, like, the
Sure.
purpose of a firm is to serve customers. And so if you don't
Sure.
understand who those customers are and what they
Sure.
want, then you're just like
Sure.
walking around blindfolded.
Sure.
And
Sure.
I feel like it's getting easier for people to avoid some of that core instruction if they don't want to get it, or
Sure.
don't seek
Yeah.
it out.
Sure.
I will say, like, to your point, it is possible to pick up some of these skills outside of the classroom, right?
Yeah.
So your education on these general management principles happened as you were working, because
Sure.
you were seeking out that training and seeking out those experiences. So all is not lost. Like, if you choose to get a
No.
special
No.
master's degree in finance, I think there's a career path for that. But I would encourage you to, spend some time with the sales group and spend some time with
Yeah.
marketing and with
No, I
HR,
agree.
and get
And the
round
other
out
big
that
thing
skill
for
set.
me is just reading books.
Yeah, that
Just
too. Absolutely.
reading management books, business books, and trying to keep up with what's happening and everything else, and just challenging yourself. So let's take a step back. Let's go back to Clive, and maybe you could summarize. So Clive is saying, should I invest in an MBA? So
And
your
the
answer
answer
is
is probably. Know what it is that you want to do afterwards, and make sure that, like, the salaries check out with what it is that you want to do. I read a sad story once, about a guy who got a master's degree in puppetry. This is not an
oh
MBA, right? So he worked as a teacher, and he wanted to, like, pursue his passion, and so he got this mastery and went tens of thousands of dollars into debt to do this, to get this master degree. And then on the other end, discovered there were no jobs for master puppeteers, and so he ended up working in the same school district that he left before, and only now as a substitute teacher, making significantly less. Um, you know,
and with a massive debt.
there's less risk. Yes, only with massive debt. There's less risk of that if you're getting a business degree, but
Sure.
it's still risk. Like, know what it is that you want to do,
Sure.
and make sure that makes sense. And then also, it depends on where you go and what you study.
Yeah.
So don't, keep your eyes open about that. And
Sure.
then finally, talk to a non-business school professor and get their opinions too.
Yeah. Good idea. Good. Well, we wish you the best of luck, Clive, in your decision, and let us know how it goes. And we look forward to talking to you
Well, next week, Colin will be forced to justify his existence. So look forward to that.
Funny enough, we're skipping next week. We're going to go straight on to the following week. Thanks a lot, everyone, and see you next week. Cheers. Thanks so much for watching. And if you enjoyed this video, please make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode.